It was early morning at one of the biggest event halls in the city. The halls were massive, echoing every little sound, and the lights were still dim, giving a quiet, almost empty feeling. Outside, the city was slowly waking up, but inside the hall, the preparations for a big show had already begun. Workers moved back and forth, arranging chairs, testing microphones, checking cables, and rushing from one side of the hall to another. There was a sense of urgency everywhere. Everyone seemed busy, focused, and important. In the middle of all this hustle, a humble man worked quietly. He was a stage cleaner. He didn't wear fancy clothes or carry a clipboard. His uniform was simple, slightly worn, but clean. His hands, though rough from work, moved carefully as he swept the floor, wiped the edges of the stage, and made sure everything looked perfect. Most people barely noticed him. Some walked past him without even saying hello. Others glanced briefly and went on with their tasks. The workers on the stage were often in a hurry, checking their schedules or speaking on phones. He was invisible to them, part of the background like the walls or the empty seats, but he didn't mind. He had been doing this work for many years, and he had learned a simple truth: people notice what they want to notice. That didn't change who he was inside. He had a quiet pride in his work. Every sweep, every wipe, every little adjustment mattered to him. The stage had to be perfect, and he made it perfect, even if no one clapped for him. As he moved across the hall, he glanced at the instruments being set up. Guitars, drums, keyboards, and microphones were placed with care. The musicians had arrived early to rehearse. They were full of energy, laughing, joking, and tuning their instruments. To them, this stage was their world, their moment. To him, it was part of his daily life. He had cleaned hundreds of stages before, and every time he had quietly admired the music that would soon fill the air. Music had always fascinated him. It had been his escape, his comfort, and sometimes his only friend. Years ago, before life made things difficult, he had played music himself. He had dreams of performing, of creating melodies that would touch people's hearts. But life had its own plans. Family responsibilities, bills, and endless struggles had forced him to take whatever work he could find. Cleaning stages became his way to survive. Yet, even as he cleaned, the music never left him. He listened to every note, every rhythm, every pause, like it was a secret conversation meant only for him. The morning went on. The air was filled with the sound of voices, footsteps, and occasional laughter. Yet, amidst all the noise, the cleaner remained focused. He noticed small details that others missed. A chair slightly out of line, a cable that could trip someone, a smudge on the polished wood of the stage. He fixed everything without complaint. His hands moved almost automatically, guided by years of experience. Some people thought his work was ordinary, even menial. But to him, it was an art. Cleaning a stage wasn't just about removing dirt, it was about creating a space where magic could happen. As the musicians began their rehearsal, he paused for a moment to watch. A young violinist started playing a soft melody. The sound floated across the hall, gentle and calm. The cleaner stopped sweeping and just listened. His eyes softened and a small smile appeared on his face. That music reminded him of his own younger days when he had dreamed of performing. He remembered staying up late at night, practicing on an old, slightly broken instrument, imagining that one day he would stand on a stage just like this and share his music with people. Life had changed that dream, but it hadn't erased it. The more he listened, the more he felt something stirring inside him. The melody seemed to speak to him, as if the music knew his heart and whispered to him about lost dreams and quiet hopes. For a brief moment, he forgot about the mop in his hand, the dust on the floor, and the people rushing around. He just listened, letting the music wrap around him. Suddenly, one of the organizers called out in a hurried tone, "Hey, be careful with the cables." A few musicians looked annoyed, adjusting their instruments and returning to their rehearsals. The cleaner quietly stepped back, making sure he wasn't in anyone's way. He didn't want trouble. He didn't want attention. But inside, a small spark had been lit. Something he had hidden for years was waking up again. Even as he continued cleaning, he began to hum softly to himself, almost unconsciously. It was a tune from his past, a melody he had once tried to perform on stage. He hummed it gently, making sure no one could hear. His hands still moved with precision, but his heart was somewhere else. Lost in the music that he had kept alive in secret, time passed quickly. The hall grew brighter as the morning sunlight streamed through the large windows. People came and went. Musicians finished setting up. Organizers checked their schedules repeatedly. The cleaner moved from one corner to another, always watching, always adjusting, always ensuring that everything was ready. No one noticed how he occasionally paused, listened, and hummed. They saw only the worker in plain clothes, moving quietly, doing his job, but there was something different about him that day. There was a calmness, a focus, and a light in his eyes that hadn't been there before. The small spark of music that had awakened was growing, and he could feel it. It wasn't just a memory anymore, it was alive. It was calling to him gently, inviting him to remember what he had almost forgotten. The joy of creating music, the power of sharing a melody, and the beauty of being seen for who he really was. As he finished cleaning the last row of chairs, he took a deep breath and looked around the hall. Everything was in place. The stage was clean, the instruments ready, and the hall waiting for the audience. He felt a quiet satisfaction in his work. But now, something else stirred in him too, an anticipation he hadn't felt in years. He didn't know what would happen next, but he felt that something was about to change. Something small at first, but maybe, just maybe, something big enough to change his life. The cleaner picked up his mop one last time, moving it gently across the floor. His movements were calm, almost meditative. He hummed a little louder now, letting the tune flow from his heart into the quiet space around him. For the first time in a long while, he felt connected not just to the work he was doing, but to the world he had almost stopped believing in. Somewhere deep inside, he knew that this day was different. Something unseen was about to happen, something that would remind everyone, including himself, that talent, heart, and dreams cannot be hidden forever. And as the soft sunlight reflected off the polished stage floor, he straightened his back, wiped his hands on his uniform, and stepped back to look at the hall. He didn't yet know what would come next, but he felt ready. The invisible worker, the humble cleaner, had done his part. Now, the stage was not just clean, it was waiting silently for something extraordinary to happen. The hall was now alive with activity. Musicians moved around, testing their instruments, adjusting microphones, and speaking to each other in quick, excited bursts. Organizers walked back and forth, checking schedules and making last-minute changes. The audience hadn't arrived yet, but the energy in the hall was already buzzing. The cleaner, who had been working silently for hours, now found himself standing near the side of the stage watching the preparations. He had finished sweeping and wiping every corner, and for a moment, he felt free to just watch. His eyes fell on a piano sitting at the edge of the stage. It wasn't being used at that moment. The lid was open, the keys glinting under the bright stage lights. For a long time, he hadn't played an instrument. Life had pushed him toward work that paid bills, and music had become a memory. But looking at the piano now, he felt a strange pull inside him. It was a gentle, almost whispering feeling, like the piano itself was calling out to him. He hesitated. His job was to clean, not to touch instruments. He knew that if anyone saw him, they might scold him. Some musicians could be impatient, even rude, if someone interrupted their setup. The cleaner took a deep breath and stepped back. He told himself to forget it, to just continue cleaning. But the pull wouldn't leave. It grew stronger, like a quiet wave building inside him. Nudging him closer to the piano, he took another step toward it, glancing around. No one was paying attention to him. The musicians were focused on their instruments, the organizers on their lists. The cleaner reached out slowly, resting his fingers lightly on the edge of the piano. It was smooth and cold under his touch, but comforting in a way he hadn't expected. Memories flooded back, the feel of keys under his fingers, the sound of notes filling the room, and the joy of creating music that could touch hearts. For a few seconds, he just stood there, his hands hovering above the keys, unsure if he should try. Inside, he argued with himself. I'm just a worker. What if they get angry? But another thought was louder. What if this is the only moment I get? What if I don't try and regret it forever? His heart raced. The quiet pull of the piano was now stronger than his fear. He leaned closer, sitting down on the bench without making a sound. He tested one key lightly, producing a soft note. It was delicate, almost fragile. His fingers felt a little stiff, but the sound brought a wave of comfort. He pressed another key, then another. Slowly, his confidence grew. The notes were still simple, but they felt alive in his hands, like they had been waiting for him to return. The cleaner started to play a soft melody. It wasn't perfect, and it didn't matter. The sound was gentle, almost like a whisper, weaving through the bustling activity of the hall. For a moment he thought someone might notice. He stopped, held his breath, but no one looked his way. The musicians were absorbed in their own rehearsals, the organizers in their lists. He let the music flow again, this time a little louder, a little bolder. As he played, he closed his eyes. The world around him faded. The chatter, the footsteps, the moving chairs all disappeared. It was just him and the piano, and the music that had lived inside him for so long. Each note carried a part of his story, years of hard work, nights spent dreaming, moments of struggle, and small joys that had kept him going. He felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom. Minutes passed. He didn't notice time. The melody became richer, more expressive, as if it had a life of its own. His fingers moved more confidently, pressing the keys with a gentle strength. The cleaner didn't plan what to play. The music came naturally, flowing from memory, emotion, and instinct. It wasn't a show, and it wasn't meant to impress anyone. It was simply him, finally giving voice to a part of himself that had been silent for too long. Somewhere across the hall, a musician paused mid-step, glancing toward the piano. His brow furrowed slightly, unsure of what he had heard. Another organizer stopped checking a list and tilted her head, curiosity pulling her attention toward the soft melody. No one yet realized it was the stage cleaner who was playing. To them, the sound was mysterious, beautiful, and unexpected. The cleaner, lost in the music, didn't notice the first few glances. He was entirely absorbed, feeling each note echo in the hall and in his own heart. Every mistake he made seemed to vanish, carried away by the emotion behind the melody. It was raw, honest, and strangely powerful. Even he was surprised by how easily the music flowed from him, as if the years of longing and silent practice had been waiting for this single moment to break free. Few staff members began to gather quietly, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from. They expected a musician, someone on the rehearsal list, but when they looked at the piano, they saw him, the cleaner in his simple uniform, sitting with a posture that was both humble and proud. A few of them gasped quietly. The music didn't stop. If anything, it grew more beautiful, more confident. The cleaner didn't notice their surprise. He didn't notice the growing attention. He only felt the music, letting it move through him, letting it tell his story. For the first time that day, the hall felt different. It wasn't just a place for preparation anymore. It was alive with emotion. The melody seemed to stretch from the piano to every corner of the room, touching people in ways that words never could. The hurried, busy atmosphere slowed down. Musicians paused their tuning. Organizers stopped walking. Even the stage lights seemed to glow a little warmer. The cleaner's mind wandered back to his past. He remembered the first time he had touched a piano as a boy, the first tune he had learned, the first time someone had clapped for him, even if it was just a friend or a family member. He remembered dreaming of performing on stages much bigger than this one. Life had taken him on a different path, but now, in this quiet moment, he realized something important. His music had never left him. It had been waiting, patient, like a friend who knew he would return. He played on, letting the melody grow richer and more layered. Sometimes it was soft and gentle, sometimes it surged with energy and hope. Every note carried emotion, every pause was meaningful. The cleaner didn't care about applause or recognition. This was for him, for the music that had survived in silence, and for the small part of him that had always believed that dreams could return. Minutes turned into a small eternity. The hall was completely silent except for the piano. When the cleaner finally lifted his hands from the keys, the room seemed to hold its breath. For a moment, no one moved, no one spoke, and no one even blinked. Then, slowly, the sound of whispered amazement spread through the hall. People realized what they had just witnessed. The humble stage cleaner, the man they had ignored all morning, had created something extraordinary with nothing but an instrument and his heart. The cleaner looked up, surprised. He hadn't noticed how many people were watching. Some eyes were wide with disbelief. Some were shining with tears. A few people quietly applauded, almost afraid to break the magic. And still, he felt the same calm satisfaction that he always did after finishing a piece of music. He had shared a part of himself, and that was enough. In that moment, the cleaner realized something he hadn't known before. Life could surprise him. It could offer moments he hadn't expected. It could make people see him not for the uniform he wore, not for the work he did, but for the person he truly was. Music had done that. Music had given him a voice when words could not. He stood up, brushed his hands on his uniform, and stepped back slightly. The hall slowly returned to movement, but the energy had changed. The ordinary had become extraordinary. The stage was no longer just a place for rehearsal. It had become a space where something impossible had happened. And the cleaner, who had always worked in the background, knew deep inside that his life had already begun to change in ways he could never have imagined. The moment the cleaner's hands touched the piano again, something in the hall shifted. The soft melody he had played earlier grew deeper, richer, and more confident. The notes seemed to float effortlessly across the room, filling every corner of the space. It was no longer just a sound, it was a story. Every note carried emotion, a part of his life, his struggles, and his silent dreams. The music didn't demand attention, but somehow it commanded it. The musicians, who had been busy tuning their instruments, stopped. Some leaned slightly toward the stage, eyes wide in disbelief. They whispered to each other, trying to identify who could be playing such an expressive melody. Their curiosity grew, but they didn't interrupt. Even the organizers, who were checking schedules and lists, froze for a moment. The hall, which had been buzzing with preparation, became almost sacred in silence. Filled only with the sound of his playing, the cleaner's fingers moved faster now, but still with control. Each note seemed deliberate, each chord meaningful. He didn't plan the music, he didn't try to impress anyone. It simply came from him, flowing naturally like a river long trapped behind a dam. He remembered nights spent dreaming, months spent practicing quietly on an old, worn instrument, moments when music had been his only friend. All of it poured into the melody. He closed his eyes, feeling the sound vibrate through his fingers, his arms, and into the quiet room. Every mistake he had made in the past, every opportunity he had missed, seemed to vanish. The music was no longer just notes. It was his voice, his heart, his soul. Speaking without words, a few people began to quietly gather near the stage, trying not to disturb him. They leaned against the walls, some with hands over their mouths, some with tears quietly forming in their eyes. The cleaner was unaware of their presence. He didn't look for approval or recognition. He only felt the joy of creating something that had been waiting for decades to be heard. The melody began to change. It started slow and gentle, almost like a whisper of memory. Then it grew bolder, more energetic, like hope rising after a long struggle. His hands danced across the keys, moving faster, more confidently. The cleaner's body seemed to sway slightly with the music, as if he and the piano were one being, creating something magical together. One of the musicians, a violinist, stepped closer, curiosity overpowering caution. She listened quietly, holding her instrument at her side. She had never heard anything like it. It was emotional, raw, and completely unexpected. She looked around, noticing that the room was strangely still. Even the stagehands, who had been moving hurriedly just moments before, had stopped, entranced by the music. The cleaner didn't stop. The melody now carried hints of his life hardship, patience, small joys, and quiet hope. Every chord seemed to tell a story. The notes that floated through the air were no longer just sounds. They were moments of his life being shared with the world. He had always felt invisible, overlooked, and unnoticed. But now, for the first time, his presence mattered. The music made people see him not the uniform, not the cleaning job, but the person who had worked hard, loved deeply, and never given up. A few audience members began to whisper to each other, their voices trembling with emotion. "Who is that? I can't believe it. It's him." They were pointing toward the cleaner, realizing that the person they had barely noticed all morning was producing music that touched their hearts. Some of them even held their hands to their chests, as if trying to keep the feeling from overwhelming them. The cleaner's melody grew stronger, more expressive. He allowed himself to pause occasionally, letting the notes resonate and linger. The silence between chords made the music even more powerful. The hall felt alive, as if it had been waiting for this moment. Every sound, every vibration was being absorbed by the people around him. It was more than performance. It was connection. Every person in the room could feel the emotions behind the music. He remembered his younger days, sitting alone at night, playing music on an old piano that had seen better times. Those nights were lonely, filled with longing, and yet full of dreams. He remembered the small moments of joy when someone had praised his playing, or when he had imagined an audience clapping for him. Now, decades later, it was happening for real. The cleaner's life had been ordinary, unnoticed, and often difficult, but in this moment, he was extraordinary. As the final notes lingered, the cleaner looked up. For the first time, he saw the hall filled with people who were no longer ignoring him. Their expressions were filled with amazement, respect, and awe. Even the organizers, who had been so focused on schedules and plans, had stopped to watch. The musicians stared at him, their mouths slightly open, as if they couldn't believe what they had just heard. The cleaner felt a mixture of surprise and joy. He had expected nothing, and yet everything had changed. Slowly, the first claps began. One person, then another, then a few more. The sound started quietly but grew rapidly as more people joined in. Soon, the entire hall was applauding. The cleaner stood up, slightly embarrassed, but deeply moved. He had never experienced anything like this. The people who had ignored him, who had treated him as invisible, were now seeing him in a completely new light. The music had broken barriers that words never could. The reaction didn't stop there. Some people had tears in their eyes. Others were whispering about how unbelievable it was that such a humble worker could produce music so beautiful, so emotional. There was a sense of magic in the air, a sense that something extraordinary had just occurred. The cleaner, though still quiet and humble, felt the weight of that magic. He realized that this was more than just a performance. It was a moment that could change his life forever. He stepped back from the piano slowly, letting the audience's applause wash over him. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The music had spoken for him. It had told a story that words could not. It had revealed the heart of a man who had worked quietly, loved music deeply, and never given up, even when life had been hard. For the first time in a long while, he felt truly seen. He felt the value of his dreams, the importance of his dedication, and the power of his own voice. He understood that talent could exist anywhere, in anyone, regardless of their position or their job. All it took was one moment, one chance, for that talent to shine. The cleaner looked around the hall one more time. The people who had overlooked him were now clapping, smiling, and even some were wiping tears. The musicians who had been busy tuning their instruments were now staring in wonder. The organizers were whispering to each other, trying to understand what had just happened. And through it all, he felt a quiet pride, not in fame or recognition, but in the fact that he had shared a piece of his heart with the world. And it had been heard. As he stepped away from the piano and returned to his cleaning supplies, he felt a sense of calm joy. He knew that life had just shifted in ways he could not yet fully understand. What had been a simple morning of work had become a moment of transformation. The hall, the people, and even the music itself had changed because he had dared to follow the pull of his heart, to trust the music that had been inside him all along. And in that moment, the cleaner realized something extraordinary. Dreams could survive hardship. Talent could exist unnoticed for years, but when the right moment came, it could shine brighter than anyone had ever imagined. And sometimes the world needed just a single spark to light up an entire room. That morning, that spark had been him, the humble worker who cleaned the stage, and for the first time, he had been truly seen. The applause didn't stop immediately. It lingered, growing louder as more people realized what had just happened. The cleaner, still standing near the piano, felt a strange mix of embarrassment, joy, and disbelief. He had played music countless times in his life, but never like this. Never in front of so many people, never with such attention, and never with the raw emotion that now seemed to fill the hall. His heart pounded in his chest as he tried to take in the moment. People slowly approached him. Musicians who had been tuning instruments moments ago now stood frozen, staring at him as if they had just discovered a hidden treasure. One of them, a young violinist, took a hesitant step forward. She looked him directly in the eyes and whispered, I didn't know you could play like this." Her voice trembled with a mix of awe and respect. It wasn't a question, it was an acknowledgement. Others gathered closer, whispering and pointing quietly. "Is that the cleaner? He's been sitting here all morning, cleaning, and he can play like that?" The room buzzed with disbelief. People who had ignored him earlier now looked at him differently. They realized that for years they had been blind to something extraordinary, something that had been hidden in plain sight. The cleaner, still overwhelmed, took a step back. He had never expected attention. Recognition had never been his goal. He had played because music was part of him, something he could not ignore. But seeing the reactions, hearing the whispers, and feeling the eyes of so many people on him, he realized something important. This moment could change everything. One of the organizers, a man in a crisp shirt holding a clipboard, stepped forward. He looked a little awkward, unsure how to approach someone he had never noticed before. "Excuse me," he said, clearing his throat. We didn't know you played." That was incredible. The words sounded simple, but they carried weight. For the first time, someone in authority recognized him for more than the work he did. The cleaner nodded, quietly unsure what to say. He had no rehearsed words, no explanation for years of practice hidden behind work and responsibility. He only knew that the music had been real, and that was enough. Yet, as he looked around, he saw more than admiration. He saw respect, curiosity, and genuine wonder. People were seeing him, truly seeing him, for the first time. Questions began to flow. "How long have you been playing?" someone asked. "Why didn't you ever tell anyone?" Another voice followed. The cleaner smiled softly, shaking his head. I never had a chance," he said simply. He didn't need to explain more. The music had said everything he could not put into words. As people continued to talk and whisper, the musicians began to gather around the piano. They asked if he had learned formally, if he had studied music, if he had performed anywhere before. The cleaner answered humbly, sharing bits of his story, how he had started as a boy, how life had forced him into work, how music had always been his escape, his friend, and his passion. Every word he spoke added depth to the melody they had just heard. It wasn't just music. It was a life story, and now it had a voice outside of his own heart. The reaction of the hall continued to shift. People who had been impatient or indifferent all morning now looked at him with a new perspective. Some were moved to tears, realizing that talent and dreams can exist anywhere, regardless of circumstance. Others quietly applauded again, acknowledging not just the music, but the courage it took for him to play. Courage that had been hidden beneath years of labor, humility, and silent hope. A senior musician, someone well-respected in the local music community, stepped forward. He extended a hand, a gesture of recognition and respect. "You have a gift," he said simply. "A gift that shouldn't be hidden." The cleaner shook his hand, feeling a wave of gratitude. It was more than recognition, it was validation. A quiet acknowledgement that the years of hard work and dedication, even when invisible, mattered. The cleaner realized then that this moment wasn't just about music. It was about being seen, about having a life of quiet dedication finally acknowledged. For so long he had been overlooked. People had judged him by his uniform, his work, or his position. Now, in one moment, all of that had shifted. He was no longer invisible. He was valued, respected, and celebrated not for wealth, status, or position, but for talent, passion, and heart. The musicians invited him to sit with them. They wanted to hear more, to understand the depth of his talent, to feel the music that had been silent for so long. The cleaner hesitated. He had never imagined himself performing alongside professionals. Yet the thought of sharing music openly, without fear or restraint, excited him in a way he had not felt for decades. He nodded, took a seat at the piano again, and let his fingers move across the keys. As he played, the hall transformed further. What had been a busy, ordinary space became a sanctuary of sound, emotion, and connection. Every note he played was more confident, more assured. He felt free, alive, and part of something larger than himself. The music now carried stories of hope, resilience, and the quiet strength of a man who had never given up on his dreams. People began to gather closer, drawn by the melody and the story it told. They listened silently, moved by the honesty and raw emotion of the music. Some were young, some older, but all were touched. The cleaner didn't notice their faces. He didn't see the awe or the admiration. He only felt the music, letting it guide him, letting it speak the words his heart could not. After a while, he stopped playing, allowing the final note to linger in the air. Silence filled the hall, heavy with emotion. People looked around at each other, as if confirming that what they had just witnessed was real. Then slowly applause began again. This time it was louder, more unified. The music had left an imprint on everyone present. It was more than entertainment. It was an experience, a reminder that talent, heart, and persistence cannot be hidden forever. The cleaner stepped away from the piano, overwhelmed but deeply grateful. He felt a strange lightness, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. He had been a worker, a cleaner, someone overlooked in the rush of life. Now he had been recognized, celebrated, and admired not for appearances, but for the passion and dedication he had carried quietly for so long. The organizers and musicians began speaking to each other in hushed tones. They wanted to know how such talent had been hidden, how someone with so much skill had worked unnoticed for years. Some were already discussing opportunities for him, mentorship, performances, even invitations to participate in local shows. The cleaner listened, humbled. He hadn't expected anything beyond the joy of playing music. Yet here was the world opening doors he had never imagined. As the crowd slowly dispersed, the cleaner stayed near the stage for a moment, looking at the piano. It had been a silent companion, a vessel for his dreams, and now it had helped him share his story. The room was quiet again, but the energy had shifted. People would remember this day, remember the moment when a humble worker had played music that changed the atmosphere, and perhaps even their perspective on life. The cleaner realized that life could be unpredictable. Opportunities could appear when least expected, recognition could come when least assumed, and talent could shine when nurtured quietly and patiently. All those years of work, perseverance, and love for music had led to this moment. It wasn't just a chance to play, it was a chance to be seen, to be respected, and to be acknowledged for who he truly was. And in that moment, standing on the stage, surrounded by the aftermath of astonishment and admiration, the cleaner understood a truth he had long believed but never fully experienced, that persistence, passion, and humility could create moments that change everything. Music had given him a voice, life had tested him, and now the world had finally listened. After that unforgettable morning, the hall slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Chairs were rearranged, cables were checked, and musicians resumed their rehearsals. But something had changed, something invisible but powerful. The air seemed lighter, warmer, as if the room itself had absorbed the emotions from the cleaner's music. People moved with a newfound awareness. Remembering that extraordinary things could exist in ordinary places, the cleaner, still wearing his humble uniform, quietly packed his cleaning supplies. His hands moved automatically, but his mind was far away, replaying the events of the morning. He had never imagined that a simple moment of curiosity, a gentle pull toward a piano, could lead to such recognition. His music had touched people, even for a brief time. and it had opened doors he hadn't known existed. As he left the stage, a few of the musicians approached him. They were smiling, their eyes filled with respect and excitement. "You really have a gift," one said. "We'd love to work with you, even just for a small performance. Your music, it's special." The cleaner felt a warmth in his chest. He had never sought fame or attention, but this offer felt like a bridge to a world he had always dreamed of entering. Organizers came over as well, asking if he would like to play at other events, if he had considered teaching or performing formally. Some even offered to help him get instruments or lessons, recognizing the talent that had been quietly nurtured for years. The cleaner listened carefully, overwhelmed by the kindness and opportunity he had never expected. He realized that life could change suddenly, sometimes from the smallest spark of courage. That afternoon, he returned home, still thinking about the morning. For years he had lived quietly, unnoticed, working hard to make ends meet. Music had been his companion, his solace, and his escape. Now it was also his bridge to a new beginning. He sat on his small couch, looking at the old sheet music he had kept for decades. Dusty, worn, and forgotten, it now seemed full of potential. He could finally bring those notes to life in ways he had only imagined. In the days that followed, life began to shift gradually but noticeably. People who had known him only as a worker started seeing him differently. Some came to listen to him play, others asked questions about his story. His talent became a quiet sensation among those who had witnessed that morning. Word spread about the humble worker who had played music that touched hearts, and it inspired many to look beyond appearances, to value people for their passions and dedication rather than their job or status. The cleaner, however, remained humble. He didn't see himself as a star, nor did he crave attention. He played music because it was part of who he was. Yet he embraced the new opportunities with gratitude. He started practicing more, exploring melodies he had once feared were lost. He met other musicians, learned new techniques, and discovered parts of music he had never imagined. Each day he felt more alive, more connected to the world, and more certain that his dreams were not gone. They had been waiting, patiently, for him to find them again. He also began sharing his story quietly, not seeking recognition, but hoping to inspire others who might feel overlooked. He spoke about persistence, about following passions even when life seems harsh, and about the importance of patience and dedication. Many listened with wide eyes, moved by the idea that someone could remain so devoted to a dream, even when the world seemed to ignore it. His life became a quiet lesson in hope, a living example that talent and heart can survive long periods of obscurity. Opportunities continued to appear. He was invited to play at local events, small gatherings, and even educational programs. Children and young adults listened to him with wonder, inspired by the story of someone who had remained humble yet gifted, who had never given up despite obstacles. Some began practicing music themselves, motivated by his example. He realized that his music could now do more than soothe his own heart, it could touch and inspire. Countless others, friends and neighbors, noticed the change in him too. His posture was more confident, his smile more natural, and his steps lighter. The recognition had not made him arrogant or boastful. Instead, it had strengthened his quiet pride and reaffirmed the importance of perseverance. He had always valued hard work and dedication, but now he understood the added power of opportunity and timing. One small chance had revealed a world that had been waiting for him all along. The cleaner also reflected deeply on the morning itself. How a simple moment of curiosity had led him to sit at the piano. How hesitation and fear had been replaced by courage and trust in his own abilities. That single act, driven by passion rather than ambition, had sparked a chain of events that changed not just his day but his life. He realized that sometimes it isn't wealth, connections, or status that opens doors. It is courage, talent, and authenticity. Months passed and life began to settle into a new rhythm. He still worked as a cleaner, partly out of necessity, partly out of routine. But now he approached each task differently. Every floor he swept, every corner he wiped, reminded him of where he had been and where he was going. The work that once seemed monotonous now felt like part of a larger journey. He carried music in his heart everywhere he went, finding inspiration in the ordinary and strength in the small moments of life. He continued to play at events, each time learning more about himself and the music that had always been part of him. People who once overlooked him began to listen with respect, not just to the music, but to the person behind it. He became a symbol of perseverance, humility, and hidden potential. Stories about the humble worker who had captivated an audience with a single melody spread quietly, inspiring people to look beyond appearances and to value the unseen efforts and talents in their own lives. And yet, he remained grounded. He didn't seek fame or fortune. The music itself was his reward. Every note he played, every story he shared, reminded him of the quiet power of dreams that refused to die. He knew that life could be unpredictable, but he also knew that passion and dedication could survive even the harshest obstacles. The recognition, the applause, and the opportunities were wonderful. But the true treasure was the affirmation of his own talent and perseverance. He also began mentoring a few young musicians, sharing his experiences and teaching them not only about music but about life. He spoke about patience, about working hard even when no one notices, about courage, and about believing in one's abilities. The children and young adults looked up to him, not as a celebrity, but as a real person who had faced struggles, remained humble, and found a way to make his dreams a reality over time. The cleaner understood the full impact of that one morning. It had changed his own life, and it had also inspired others. People who had been quick to judge or overlook him now paused to consider the hidden stories of those around them. Teachers, musicians, and even casual observers began to value effort, talent, and heart more deeply. The cleaner's experience became a quiet reminder that extraordinary things can come from ordinary people, and that moments of courage and authenticity can ripple far beyond expectation. Years later, when people asked him about that morning, he would smile and speak softly. He never boasted. He would say that he had simply followed the pull of music, that he had been curious and brave enough to act when the moment called. He emphasized that it wasn't luck alone, but the result of years of quiet dedication, perseverance, and belief in his own abilities. His story became one of hope, inspiration, and human resilience, teaching that true talent will always find a way to shine. Even when hidden for years, the cleaner's life had been transformed, but it was also familiar in ways he cherished. He continued to work, to practice, to play, and to share. But now he did so with the knowledge that the world could see him for who he truly was, and that talent, humility, and persistence could create moments that change lives, not just for oneself, but for everyone who witnessed them. And in every note he played, in every audience he touched, in every young musician he inspired, the humble cleaner carried a message that dreams, no matter how long they are deferred, can come alive. That courage, even in small actions, can open doors to extraordinary experiences. And that life, despite its hardships, can surprise us in the most beautiful ways. That morning at the hall, the music had not only changed the cleaner's life, it had reminded the world that greatness can exist anywhere, waiting to be discovered.